The lawyer slid the key across the table like it weighed nothing, but it was heavier than the house I grew up in. My brother Daniel picked up the envelope with the property documents. My sister Marissa got the investment accounts. Even the old lake cabin, the place my father refused to sell after my mother died, had already been signed over to her children. And me? A small brass key attached to a peeling plastic tag. Locker 314. No explanation, no letter, no apology. Just a key. I remember staring at it while the air conditioner hummed overhead, too loud for such a quiet room. The lawyer kept talking, words about probate, transfer dates, signatures, but they all sounded like they were happening behind a closed door. Daniel cleared his throat. Well, Dad knew what he was doing. Marissa didn't look at me. She smoothed imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. You never cared about money anyway. I didn't answer, because if I opened my mouth, something ugly would come out, and I had promised myself I would not be ugly at my father's last act. Instead, I picked up the key. It was warm from the table light, not from him, and that hurt more than anything. Before my father forgot my name, he never forgot my coffee. 2 sugars, a drop of milk, stirred slowly counterclockwise because he insisted it tasted different that way. Every morning at 6, I'd find him at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper like it still mattered what day it was printed. He'd fold it perfectly when I walked in, as if he'd been waiting just for me. "You're late," he'd say, even when I wasn't. I lived 10 minutes away, but visited daily after Mom passed. My siblings lived farther, or at least that's what they told themselves. Distance became their excuse. Routine became mine. I handled groceries, doctor appointments, the slow learning curve of his medications. The pill organizer sat beside the toaster, bright plastic squares marking days he increasingly struggled to understand. At first, it was harmless forgetfulness. He'd ask the same story twice, then 4 times, then in one afternoon he asked where Mom was, and when I gently reminded him she'd been gone 8 years, he cried like it had just happened. After that, I stopped correcting him. Grief doesn't expire for a mind that resets itself. Daniel visited monthly, always bringing expensive pastries Dad barely touched. Marissa came during holidays with her children, loud, bright visits that exhausted him but made her feel like a good daughter. They thanked me often. "You're amazing for doing this," Marissa would say, kissing my cheek on her way out. "You're closer anyway," Daniel would add, already checking his phone. I never minded, or maybe I told myself I didn't. Caring for someone slowly leaving you is a quiet kind of loneliness. You don't notice how heavy it gets until someone else tries to lift it and fails. There were moments, though, moments I can't forget now. One afternoon, Daniel arrived with paperwork. "Just practical stuff," he said lightly. "Power of attorney, easier for bills." I remember how Dad looked at the pen in his hand, confused but trusting. He looked at Daniel, then at me. "You'll explain this to me later," he asked. I nodded, though Daniel answered first. "It's nothing, Dad, just helping you." I should have read it carefully. Instead, I watched my father struggle to sign his own name, letters trembling like they were unsure they belonged together anymore. The signature barely resembled him. Daniel folded the papers quickly afterward. "Good," he said. At the time, I thought good meant easier for all of us. Now I wonder who us really was. The last clear conversation I had with my father happened on a Tuesday evening that smelled like burnt toast. He sat across from me, unusually focused. "You look tired," he said. "I'm okay." "No," he insisted gently. "You're carrying something." I laughed. "I'm carrying you, remember?" But he didn't smile. He reached into his pocket and pressed something into my palm. I thought it was a coin at first, cold metal, small. "Keep this safe," he whispered. I opened my hand. A brass key. I frowned. "What is it?" He hesitated, his eyes searching my face like he was trying to memorize it before losing it again. "For when they forget," he said. "Who?" But his gaze drifted past me to the hallway, confusion settling back over him like fog returning after sunrise. "I miss your mother," he murmured. The moment closed. I put the key in my purse, and over the next few months, life filled with hospital visits, paperwork, and eventually hospice machines humming softly in the living room. I forgot about the key until the lawyer gave me another one exactly like it. After the reading of the will, Daniel suggested lunch. "Let's not make this weird," he said, clapping my shoulder too hard. "Dad wanted peace." Marissa finally looked at me then, not guilty, just impatient. "You don't think he'd punish you," she said carefully. "He just distributed things logically." Logically? I pictured the nights I slept on the couch beside his hospital bed so he wouldn't wake alone. The mornings he called me by my mother's name and I answered anyway. I almost told them about the first key, but something held me back. Instead, I slipped the locker key into my coat pocket and stood. "I have somewhere to be." Daniel sighed. "You're really going to obsess over that? It's probably old tools." Maybe. Or maybe it was the only sentence my father had left me. Outside, the winter air smelled like metal and snow. My car door creaked when I opened it, and for the first time since the funeral, my hand shook. Not from grief, from a quiet growing certainty. My father had forgotten many things at the end, but he had remembered to give me a key twice. And men like him, careful, stubborn men, did not repeat themselves without reason. I turned the engine on. The storage facility was 20 minutes away. I didn't know yet that opening locker 314 would change what I believed about my family, or my father's final months, or why my siblings seemed relieved instead of sad at the will reading. I just knew I wasn't going home. Not yet. I was going to unlock the last thing he ever trusted me with. The storage facility sat behind a row of auto shops and a faded laundromat that flickered even in daylight. I almost missed the entrance. It wasn't the kind of place you drove to with purpose, more the kind you passed every day without ever seeing. A long chain-link fence surrounded rows of beige metal doors, each one identical except for the numbers painted in black. The office smelled faintly of dust and peppermint gum. A young man behind the counter looked up from his phone. "Need a unit?" I shook my head and held up the key. "Locker 314. He glanced at the tag, then at his computer. His expression changed. Not suspicious, just curious. "You're the first person to come for that one in a long time," he said. My fingers tightened around my purse strap. "How long?" He clicked again. "Almost 2 years." 2 years. That was around the time Dad started forgetting my name. "Was my father here often?" I asked quietly. The young man shrugged. "Older gentleman? Yeah, came by with his son sometimes. Haven't seen him since last winter, though." My heartbeat slowed, heavy and deliberate. "Which son?" I asked. But he was already handing me a clipboard. "Just sign here, gate code's written at the top." I signed my name automatically, my handwriting suddenly unfamiliar to me, the same way my father's signature had looked that day at the kitchen table. Outside, the wind scraped across the metal doors, making a low, hollow whistle. I followed the numbers down the narrow corridor. 298, 305, 311. The lock was old but well cared for. No rust, no dust buildup. Someone had opened it regularly once. My thumb traced the small scratches around the keyhole, nervous marks, repeated use. I slid the key in. For a moment, I didn't turn it. My father's voice echoed in my head. "For when they forget." I exhaled and twisted. The click sounded louder than it should have. The door rolled upward with a metallic groan, and a smell of paper and cedar drifted out. Not tools, not junk. Boxes. Neatly stacked banker's boxes, each labeled in my father's careful handwriting. Dates. Names. And on top of the first box, a small tape recorder. I stepped inside slowly, my footsteps hollow against the concrete floor. Dust floated in the thin line of light from the doorway, undisturbed for months. The first box read, medical records. The second, financial transfers. The third made my stomach drop. Daniel and Marissa. Copies. Copies. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were folders, bank statements, printed emails, legal forms. Some pages were marked with yellow tabs, others with notes in my father's shaky handwriting. I did not authorize this. He said it was temporary. I don't remember signing again. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. I pulled out a document near the bottom. Power of attorney. Daniel's name. Dated the same afternoon he'd brought pastries and that cheerful smile. But underneath the signature line was another sheet, a doctor's evaluation. Patient shows signs of moderate cognitive impairment, should not sign legal documents without independent counsel present. The date was 1 day before the signing. I sank onto the small wooden stool in the corner, knees weak. He wasn't confused after, he was confused during. And my siblings had known. The wind rattled the metal door behind me, snapping me back. My gaze drifted to the tape recorder sitting alone on top of the boxes. A small white label read in faded ink, "For my daughter, only if you're alone." My throat tightened. My hands hovered over it for a long time before I finally pressed play. The tape hissed softly. Then my father's voice, fragile, slower than I remembered, but unmistakably him. "Sweetheart, if you're hearing this, it means I ran out of time." I covered my mouth, tears rising before I could stop them. "I'm trying to speak while I still know the difference between yesterday and 30 years ago," he continued softly. "Your brother thinks I don't notice things anymore. Sometimes I don't, but sometimes I do." A long pause. I could hear his breathing. "They've been moving money, saying it's for safety, for management. I pretended to agree because arguing makes them angry, and I forget what we argued about." Paper rustled near the microphone. "I went to the bank with a man from the senior center. He explained what I signed before. I don't think they expected me to check." My chest felt tight, like the air had thickened. "I wanted to tell you," he whispered, voice breaking, "but you looked so tired already taking care of me. I didn't want you choosing between loving them and protecting me." Another pause, longer this time. "So I made copies, everything I could remember to copy before I forgot where I put the copier." A faint, sad chuckle. "You were always the one who listened instead of talked, so I'm trusting you to listen now." The tape crackled. "They will say I meant the will. I didn't. I changed it after the lawyer's visit, but I think it never got filed. The man said sometimes papers disappear when family handles them." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. "If they've left you only this locker, then they finished what they started." His voice softened. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the argument that will come, but truth matters longer than comfort." The tape nearly ended, a soft click threatening silence, then one last sentence. "I remembered you, even when I forgot myself." The tape stopped. I sat frozen in the dim storage unit, surrounded by proof that grief had blinded me to something much worse than death. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had warned me. And my siblings hadn't just taken his money. They had taken advantage of the moment he trusted them most. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere in the facility, echoing sharply. For the first time since the funeral, anger rose. Not loud, not wild, but steady, heavy, like the key in my pocket. I reached for the next box labeled Financial Transfers and opened it. What I saw inside made me realize this wasn't just family betrayal. It was planned. Inside the Financial Transfers box were envelopes arranged by month, not random, chronological. My father had organized his own betrayal. Each envelope contained bank statements with certain transactions circled in red pen. The ink was faint in places, darker in others, as if he'd gone back over them again and again to make sure they stayed visible. Large withdrawals, wire transfers, property tax payments for accounts I didn't recognize. At the bottom of the stack sat a small spiral notebook, the one he used to keep grocery lists in. I recognized the indentation marks where he pressed too hard with his pen. I opened it. Page after page, he had written reminders to himself. Check with bank again. They say I approved transfer. Daniel says temporary, but I don't remember why. Marissa angry when I asked questions. Do not sign papers without glasses. They rush me. My hands began to shake. I flipped to the last page. The handwriting was barely legible. If I forget, locker. I closed the notebook slowly and leaned back against the cold metal wall of the unit. My breath echoed faintly in the quiet, and for a moment I let myself grieve, not for the inheritance, not even for the money, for how scared he must have felt, realizing his memory was betraying him while his children were too. A sound of footsteps crunching gravel outside made me instinctively lower my voice, even though I was alone. I pulled out one more document from the bottom envelope, a property purchase agreement. Buyer, Marissa Cole. Funding source, authorized transfer, signed by father. The date was 3 months after his doctor declared cognitive impairment. The lake cabin. She hadn't inherited it. She had bought it from him using his own money. My stomach tightened. Daniel had gotten the investment accounts. Marissa got the cabin. And I, the only one present daily, got nothing but a key. Because they believed I wouldn't fight. I gathered several folders carefully, stacking them in my bag. Not all, just enough to understand what I was seeing. My father hadn't made copies for drama. He'd made them for proof. As I turned to leave, I hesitated and looked back at the unit. It didn't feel like a storage locker anymore. It felt like a conversation he had been waiting for months to finish. I'm listening, I whispered softly. Then I pulled the door down and locked it again. Daniel answered my call on the second ring. Hey, he said casually, you calm down? I gripped the phone tighter. Did you know Dad was declared cognitively impaired before you got power of attorney? Silence. Not confusion. Silence. Then a sigh. Where did you hear that? So it's true. You're misunderstanding paperwork. My voice stayed steady, surprising even me. You transferred money. A lot of money. Everything we did was legal. Legal. He didn't say right. I found his records, I said quietly. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him recalculating. You went to the locker, he said. So he knew about it. A chill crept up my spine. You've been there? He replied quickly. We were cleaning up his old junk months ago. Probably forgot something. Copies? I asked. His voice sharpened slightly. You're blowing this up emotionally. Dad was declining. We managed things so bills stayed paid. That's called responsibility. Did responsibility include buying the cabin from him with his own account? He didn't answer immediately. When he spoke again, the patience in his tone was thinner. Look, you always saw things in black and white. Life isn't like that. No, I whispered, but exploitation is. Careful, he warned softly. Accusations can't be taken back. I looked at the locker key in my palm. Neither can signatures taken from someone who didn't understand them. He exhaled slowly. You don't want to start this fight. You already started it, I said. I just finally know. I hung up before he could reply. My hands trembled afterwards, not from fear, but from clarity. For months after Dad's diagnosis, I'd believed we were all grieving together. But grief doesn't organize bank transfers. It doesn't hide medical evaluations. It doesn't prepare explanations before questions are asked. They hadn't been coping. They'd been planning. That evening, Marissa showed up at my house unannounced. She never did that before. Her car door slammed harder than necessary, heels clicking sharply up my walkway. I opened the door before she knocked. Her smile was tight. Daniel said you're confused. I'm not. She stepped inside without waiting, scanning the living room like evidence might be sitting on the couch. You found the locker, she said quietly. Yes. She crossed her arms. Dad wanted us to handle finances. You were emotional. He didn't want to burden you. I studied her face, the practiced calm, the rehearsed concern. He recorded a message. For the first time, real fear flickered across her eyes. He wasn't well, she replied quickly. You can't rely on confused ramblings. He was clear enough to copy bank statements. Her jaw tightened. We didn't steal anything. You purchased the cabin with his money while he was medically unfit to consent. Her voice rose. He agreed. He didn't understand. She stepped closer. You're trying to turn this into a crime because you feel left out. I shook my head slowly. I feel lied to. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something softer, almost pleading. If you challenge this, the family breaks. I thought about the months I fed him soup while he forgot my name but still held my hand. The family already broke, I said gently. I just didn't know who broke it. Her eyes hardened again. Then do what you want, she said coldly, but you won't win. She walked out, leaving the door open behind her. I didn't close it immediately, because for the first time I understood why my father hadn't confronted them himself. Some betrayals don't shout, they justify, and that makes them harder to see until you can't unsee them anymore. I looked down at the folders on my table. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer, not for revenge, for truth. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, the kind of place where voices lowered automatically, even before anyone asked you to. Her name was Miss Rahman. She didn't interrupt while I spoke, not once. I laid the documents across her desk carefully, like they were fragile photographs instead of photocopies of betrayal. The tape recorder sat last, heavier than any paper. She read everything in silence. Occasionally, she circled something with her pen. Occasionally, her eyebrow lifted, then settled again. Nearly 40 minutes passed before she finally leaned back. Your father kept exceptional records, she said calmly. I nodded. My throat felt dry. He was an accountant for 30 years. I can tell. She folded her hands. I want to be clear. Family disputes after death are common, but this, she tapped the medical evaluation sheet gently, this changes the nature of the transfers significantly. My heart began to pound again. In what way? If he was medically documented as cognitively impaired, any major financial decisions require safeguards, independent legal advice, confirmation of comprehension, sometimes even a second medical opinion. She paused. These documents show those protections were bypassed. The room felt smaller. So they took advantage of him? I whispered. She chose her words carefully. I would say there is strong evidence of undue influence. The phrase sounded clinical, but the meaning landed heavy. Can it be reversed? I asked. Possibly. Property purchases, transferred funds, even the will, if we prove it was executed while he lacked capacity. My hands trembled in my lap. He said in the recording he changed the will. Her eyes sharpened. That recording is extremely important. It establishes intent that he did not agree with the final version. I stared at the table grain, following the tiny lines like roads. I don't want to destroy them, I said quietly. They're still my siblings. She nodded. Most cases like this aren't about revenge. They're about restoring what the deceased actually wanted. I swallowed. And if they fight it? They will, she said simply, because they've lived with the assumption no one would challenge it. Her words settled over me slowly. For the first time, this wasn't just emotional anymore. It was real. The letter from the attorney arrived at Daniel's house 2 days later. I know because he called before I even finished my morning coffee. You filed a legal claim? He said sharply. I requested an investigation, I replied calmly. You're accusing us of elder abuse. I'm asking the court to decide. His breath came hard through the phone. Do you understand what this does? Lawyers, hearings, everyone will know. I looked at the kitchen chair where Dad used to sit, the indentation still faintly visible in the cushion. He knew, I said softly. He just couldn't prove it alone. Silence again, heavier than before. You think you're honoring him, he muttered. You're humiliating the family. I closed my eyes. He was humiliated signing papers he didn't understand. You weren't there for every conversation, he snapped. No, I agreed gently, but I was there every day. He hung up. Marissa didn't call. Instead, she came. Again. This time, she didn't pretend calm. You're going to drag Dad's name through court? She demanded from my doorway. I stepped aside, letting her in without speaking. She paced the living room, hands shaking. You think a judge cares about a confused recording? He signed documents. End of story. He trusted you, I replied quietly. Her eyes flashed. We handled responsibilities you avoided. I avoided taking his autonomy. She stopped pacing. You always needed to feel morally superior, she bitterly said. Dad relied on us financially because you never cared about money. I met her gaze. I cared about him. The words hung in the air between us. Her expression shifted, not guilt, not yet, something closer to fear. If this goes forward, she said slowly, Daniel could lose his business. I could lose the cabin. My kids grew up there. And Dad grew old there, I said. Her voice cracked slightly. Families make decisions, imperfect ones. I softened my tone. Then let the truth confirm that. She stared at me for a long moment. You won't drop it, she said finally. I shook my head gently. Her shoulders sagged, anger draining into something quieter. You always were his favorite, she whispered. I felt a sharp ache in my chest. No, I was just the one who stayed. She didn't answer. When she left this time, she closed the door carefully behind her. Weeks passed slowly. Lawyers exchanged documents. Banks sent archived records. The storage locker became central evidence, every copied statement cataloged, every note analyzed. I visited the unit once more, not to gather proof, but to sit. Dust floated in the thin beam of light exactly as before. The stool creaked under me. The tape recorder rested where I'd placed it back. I pressed play again, not for evidence, for comfort. I remembered you, my father's voice said softly. The ache felt different now. Grief had turned into responsibility, not to win, but to listen when he no longer could speak. The court date arrived on a gray morning that threatened rain, but never delivered it. Daniel avoided my eyes in the hallway. Marissa held her husband's hand tightly. No one yelled, no one cried, because real family fractures happen quietly, in paperwork, in testimony, in questions asked politely under oath. and for the first time, strangers would hear what my father had tried to say alone in a small room with a tape recorder. I sat down at the wooden bench, hands folded, breathing steady. This wasn't the moment of revenge. It was the moment truth stopped waiting. Courtrooms always feel colder than they should. Not physically, though the air conditioning hummed steadily, but emotionally. Every voice lowers, every movement measured, like the room demands respect for decisions that can't be undone once spoken. I sat at the long wooden table beside Miss Raman, my hands folded in my lap so no one could see them tremble. Across the aisle, Daniel adjusted his tie repeatedly, though it was already straight. Marissa stared ahead, jaw tight, her husband whispering something I couldn't hear. No one looked at me. The judge entered quietly, robes brushing against the chair as he sat. The clerk spoke, papers shuffled, and then it began. Miss Raman stood first. She didn't dramatize anything. She simply told the timeline: doctor's diagnosis, power of attorney, financial transfers, property purchase, the final will. Then she played the recording. My father's voice filled the courtroom, fragile but clear. I watched Daniel's shoulders stiffen at the words, "They've been moving money." Marissa closed her eyes when he said he pretended not to notice to avoid arguments. No one interrupted. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. When the tape ended, silence lingered longer than any speech. Then Daniel's lawyer stood. He spoke smoothly about aging, confusion, family management of finances, and how memory loss creates doubt. He described the recording as emotional interpretation, not legal proof. I listened carefully, because for the first time I heard how betrayal sounds when dressed in professionalism. Then came testimony. The doctor confirmed the cognitive impairment diagnosis. The bank representative confirmed unusually large transfers authorized without independent verification. And finally, me. I walked to the witness stand slowly, the wooden floor echoing beneath each step. I swore to tell the truth, my voice steady despite my heartbeat. Miss Raman's questions were gentle. How often did you visit your father? Daily. Did he express confusion about finances? Yes. Did he ever mention fear of conflict? I swallowed. He avoided arguments, especially near the end. Then Daniel's lawyer approached. He smiled politely. You loved your father very much. Yes. And you were his primary caregiver. Yes. Would you say you were emotionally closest to him? The question felt heavier than it sounded. I was present, I answered. He nodded. Is it possible he told you what you wanted to hear to comfort you? I met his gaze. He told the recorder when I wasn't there. A faint murmur rippled through the room. He shifted tactics. You received nothing in the will. Isn't it true this lawsuit is motivated by resentment? The air tightened. I thought about the nights beside his hospital bed, the mornings he forgot who I was but held my hand anyway. No, I said quietly. It's motivated by listening. He paused, then stepped back. I left the stand feeling lighter than when I'd approached it. Because I hadn't defended myself, I'd defended him. The judge didn't rule that day. Weeks passed again, slower than before. No angry calls came, no visits. Silence settled between my siblings and me like a closed door neither side touched. I didn't chase it. Instead, I began clearing Dad's house. His clothes still smelled faintly of cedar. The kitchen drawers still held rubber bands wrapped around nothing in particular. His newspaper stack remained perfectly folded beside the chair he never sat in again. Grief returned differently this time, softer, less tangled with confusion. One afternoon, I found an old photograph tucked inside a book. All three of us as children, Daniel holding a fishing rod twice his height, Marissa laughing mid-movement, and me beside Dad gripping his arm as if balance depended on it. On the back he'd written, "Stay kind to each other." I traced the faded ink until my eyes blurred. We hadn't, but maybe truth was the first step back towards it. The call came on a Thursday morning. Miss Rahman's voice was calm but warm. "The court ruled in your favor." I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. "He determined your father lacked capacity during key transactions. The transfers and property sale are voided. The prior will, the one before the altered version, is reinstated." My chest tightened. What did it say? "You and your siblings inherit equally." Equal. Not nothing, not everything, just fair. "And the cabin?" I asked quietly. "Return to the estate." I exhaled shakily. No victory rush came, just relief, quiet and steady. "He would have liked that," I whispered. "Yes," she said softly. "I think he would." Daniel called that evening. Not angry, just tired. "We received the ruling," he said. "I know." A long pause. "I didn't think you'd go this far." "I didn't think I'd need to." Another silence. Then, quieter. "He really recorded that?" "Yes." His voice wavered slightly. "He asked me once if I'd taken money. I thought he was confused." I didn't respond. I told myself I was managing things, keeping control before everything fell apart. "That's how it starts," I said gently. We didn't resolve everything that night, but we spoke longer than we had in months, and for the first time, neither of us tried to rewrite what happened. We just let it exist. The cabin smelled exactly the same. Pine wood, lake water, and the faint trace of motor oil from a boat that hadn't run in years. I stood on the porch with the court papers folded in my coat pocket, staring at the rippling surface of the water. Late afternoon sun scattered across it in soft gold patches, the same way it had when we were children, before careers, marriages, and quiet resentments replaced simple things like skipping stones. Marissa arrived first. Her car rolled slowly down the gravel path, tires crunching like they were unsure whether they belonged here anymore. She stepped out carefully, looking at the cabin, not with ownership, but memory. For a moment, she didn't see me. She just stared at the porch railing where we used to sit swinging our legs. "I thought I lost this place," she said softly when she noticed me. "You almost did," I replied, not harshly, just honest. She walked up the steps, her hand brushing along the wooden rail as though checking if it was real. "I didn't mean to steal it," she said. "I thought if I secured it early, we wouldn't have to argue later." I leaned against the post. "You secured it alone." Her shoulders sagged slightly. Daniel's car pulled in behind hers. He stepped slower than usual, no confident stride this time, just a man approaching something he couldn't undo. The three of us stood awkwardly in the fading sunlight, adults unsure how to be siblings again. No lawyers, no paperwork, just us. We went inside together. Dust had settled in thin layers over the dining table. A deck of cards sat half open, exactly where Dad left it after the last summer he could still remember the rules. Daniel picked it up carefully. "He beat me every time," he murmured. "He cheated," Marissa said automatically. I smiled faintly. He just counted better. The tension softened, just slightly. We opened windows, let fresh air move through old silence. Marissa wiped the counter without being asked. Daniel carried out a box of broken life jackets. Small actions, apologies without speeches. Finally, we sat at the table where so many quiet resentments once began. Daniel looked at me. I thought if I handled finances early, things wouldn't spiral. When the diagnosis came, I panicked. Marissa nodded. Me too. I kept seeing hospital bills, long-term care. I convinced myself we were protecting the assets. And the will? I asked gently. They exchanged a glance. He said he trusted us, Daniel said slowly. We interpreted that as permission. I took a breath. He trusted all of us, I replied, but he needed honesty more than management. Silence settled again, heavier this time, but not hostile. Regret filled the spaces anger once lived in. Marissa's voice softened. Did he really remember you at the end? I swallowed. Not always, but he tried. Her eyes watered and she looked away toward the lake. I avoided visiting because I couldn't stand him forgetting me, she whispered. I understood then. We hadn't betrayed him in the same way. I stayed and carried the weight. They stepped back and feared it. Different failures, same loss. That evening we lit a small fire near the shore, something Dad used to insist on, even in mild weather. The flames flickered low, reflected in the darkening water. Daniel handed me a mug of coffee, 2 sugars, a drop of milk. I stared at it. You remembered, I said quietly. He nodded. He always made yours first. We sat together watching sparks drift upward. No one discussed money. No one mentioned court. We spoke about small things. Fishing trips, Mom's terrible singing voice, the year Dad tried to fix the dock and fell in twice. Laughter came carefully at first, then naturally. Grief had room to exist without accusation. Before leaving, I took the tape recorder from my bag. I think you should hear it, I said. They listened in silence. Daniel covered his face halfway through. Marissa cried openly near the end. When the tape stopped, none of us spoke immediately. Finally, Daniel whispered, He knew. Yes, I said softly. And he still loved us, Marissa added. Yes. That was the part we needed most. Not innocence, not justification. Just the truth that love had existed even inside mistakes. We didn't divide the cabin that night. We didn't need to. The court had handled ownership. We handled something harder, acknowledgement. As we locked the door together, Daniel hesitated. Keep the key, he said to me. I looked at the brass cabin key in his hand, different from the storage locker one, but somehow connected. You're sure? He nodded. You listened when we didn't. I accepted it quietly, not as a reward, as responsibility, the same thing my father had given me from the beginning. I sit here now, the spiral notebook beside me and the lake just beyond the cabin, and I think about what inheritance really means. Not the money, not the property, not even the letters or the recordings. It's trust. It's memory. It's the courage to act when those you love are vulnerable and the strength to forgive when mistakes have been made. My father left me a storage locker key, and I thought it meant nothing. A box of old papers, a dusty metal door, a lock I could barely turn. But inside that locker was everything he wanted me to know, that truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. That loyalty isn't about following orders or staying quiet. It's about noticing what others can't, about listening when no one else will. And most of all, that love isn't erased by mistakes, only clarified by honesty. When I faced my siblings, I wasn't angry. I was clear, not cruel, not vindictive, just aware. And in that awareness, I found something I had been missing for years: peace. My father's love for me was quiet, steady, and enduring. The locker key wasn't just metal, it was responsibility, and it was hope. I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Are there conversations you've avoided, truths you've ignored because they're uncomfortable, or loved ones you've assumed would always act fairly, only to realize that justice sometimes needs someone to stand for it? Family isn't perfect. Siblings, parents, children, we all stumble, we all fail. But it is possible to repair, to rebuild, and to honor those we've lost, even if it means challenging what we thought was settled. That is what I learned from the locker, from the papers, and from my father's fragile voice on that tape. I hope this story reminds you that listening matters, that noticing matters, and that sometimes what feels like nothing, a key, a note, a simple gesture, carries more weight than we could ever imagine. Would you have done what I did? Would you have opened that locker, listened to the recording, and faced your family with truth instead of anger? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and if stories like this touch your heart, consider subscribing and joining me as we explore more tales of love, betrayal, redemption, and the messy, beautiful realities of family. The cabin settled into something we hadn't felt in years, quiet, almost gentle. Summer mornings smelled like fresh pine and lake water, and the sunlight bounced off the windows, scattering warm rectangles across the wooden floor. It felt like the house itself was exhaling. That weekend, I arrived first. I carried the small spiral notebook, my father's writing, still faint but legible, and a basket of coffee, careful to make it the way he liked, 2 sugars, a drop of milk, stirred slowly, counterclockwise. I paused on the porch, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant splash of a loon. This was what I'd fought for, moments like this, uninterrupted by anger or suspicion, where the past and present could coexist. Marissa arrived next, her car door clicking lightly. She stepped out slowly, holding a basket of pastries. She didn't rush inside. Instead, she lingered for a moment on the porch, hands brushing the railing like she was reacquainting herself with something lost. "It feels different," she said softly, "not heavy." "Because it isn't ours to fight over anymore," I replied, stepping aside so she could come in. Daniel came last. He carried a small cooler for the lake, sandwiches and bottled water, and for the first time in months he looked unhurried. His hands were clasped behind his back like he was carrying something important, but it wasn't the documents or even his pride. It was a willingness to begin again. We began the day like children returning to the cabin we had grown up in, unpacking boxes, opening windows, dusting surfaces. Every corner carried a memory: my father's old fishing rod leaning in the corner, the deck chairs where we used to roast marshmallows, the dock he had tried to repair and failed 6 times. The past wasn't erased, but it was no longer threatening. At lunch, we sat outside. The lake mirrored the sky in perfect clarity, and for a moment I realized we hadn't spoken of the lawsuit, the property, or the transfers. The air was free of accusation. Instead, we spoke about small things: the new batch of trees Daniel had planted in his yard, Marisha's daughter's awkward first day at camp, the sound of loons echoing across the water. For the first time, I noticed a subtle shift. There was no rivalry in our voices. There was only presence. After lunch, Daniel suggested we try the old rowboat. We had fought over who got to sit in front when we were children, and he reminded us, almost shyly, that the same rules applied: smallest first, middle seat to the oldest, the largest at the back. We laughed quietly, not mockingly, but because the memory was tender and real. I took the middle seat, careful to balance the weight. Marissa was in front, Daniel behind. The water lapped gently against the hull. The boat swayed lightly with each stroke, the sound hypnotic, and for the first time in months I didn't feel the weight of betrayal or court papers pressing against my chest. We stopped in the middle of the lake, letting the current drift us slowly. Silence fell over us, but it was comfortable, a silence that belonged to shared history and recognition of our father's final lessons. I opened the spiral notebook, reading aloud a few lines, small observations my father had written in his final days, reminders to himself, little truths he wanted to pass on. My voice trembled, but I kept reading. Marissa's hand reached over to touch mine lightly. Daniel placed his hand over hers. No words were spoken, no apologies needed. This was acknowledgement, recognition, healing. Later that evening, we returned to the cabin. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. I lit a small fire near the shore, something Dad had insisted on even when the nights were warm. Sparks rose into the sky, floating for a moment before disappearing. I realized then that each spark was like our memories, brief, beautiful, and impossible to capture completely. We sat close to the fire, coffee and tea steaming between us. Daniel's daughter leaned against her father's shoulder. Marissa's youngest kept poking the embers with a stick, laughing when a spark jumped into the air. I held my father's spiral notebook on my lap, thumb tracing his careful handwriting. For the first time, I didn't feel the absence of my father as sharp pain. I felt him present in the habits he taught, the love he gave, and the trust he had placed in me to protect his truth. "You remembered everything," Daniel whispered to me quietly. I tried. He trusted me to notice when others didn't. Marissa nodded, tears catching the firelight. I think he wanted this, not fights, but presence. We sat together as the fire dwindled, not speaking much, because words weren't necessary. We simply existed in the space he had left for us, a space shaped by trust, love, and the difficult lessons of responsibility. That night, before going to bed, I stepped out on the porch alone. The lake was perfectly still. I held the locker key in one hand and the spiral notebook in the other. I realized then that inheritance isn't just about money, property, or legal documents. True inheritance is trust. It is memory. It is the courage to act when no one else will, and the grace to forgive when the truth is revealed. I pressed the locker key into my palm one last time. It had done its job. It had guided me to truth. And truth, finally, had restored not only my father's honor, but our family's fragile bond. The air smelled faintly of pine and summer rain. A loon called across the lake, and I smiled quietly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. My father's voice lingered in my mind. I remembered you, even when I forgot myself. And I remembered him. We would rebuild, slowly, carefully, with respect for the past and hope for what comes next. I sit here now, the spiral notebook beside me and the lake just beyond the cabin, and I think about what inheritance really means. Not the money, not the property, not even the letters or the recordings. It's trust. It's memory. It's the courage to act when those you love are vulnerable, and the strength to forgive when mistakes have been made. My father left me a storage locker key, and I thought it meant nothing. A box of old papers, a dusty metal door, a lock I could barely turn. But inside that locker was everything he wanted me to know. That truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. That loyalty isn't about following orders or staying quiet. It's about noticing what others can't, about listening when no one else will. And most of all, that love isn't erased by mistakes, only clarified by honesty. When I faced my siblings, I wasn't angry. I was clear, not cruel, not vindictive, just aware. And in that awareness, I found something I had been missing for years: peace. My father's love for me was quiet, steady, and enduring. The locker key wasn't just metal. It was responsibility, and it was hope. I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Are there conversations you've avoided, truths you've ignored because they're uncomfortable, or loved ones you've assumed would always act fairly, only to realize that justice sometimes needs someone to stand for it? Family isn't perfect. Siblings, parents, children, we all stumble. We all fail. But it is possible to repair, to rebuild, and to honor those we've lost, even if it means challenging what we thought was settled. That is what I learned from the locker, from the papers, and from my father's fragile voice on that tape. I hope this story reminds you that listening matters, that noticing matters, and that sometimes what feels like nothing, a key, a note, a simple gesture, carries more weight than we could ever imagine. Would you have done what I did? Would you have opened that locker, listened to the recording, and faced your family with truth instead of anger? Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and if stories like this touch your heart, consider subscribing and joining me as we explore more tales of love, betrayal, redemption, and the messy, beautiful realities of family.